Lovely. Or at least we're nice and dry inside. Well, I hope you're nice. Okay. So nice gentle movements to start off. Just try and get a sense that as you start to move and you become more aware of your posture, that it kind of acts like your body acts like a sort of kind of magnet or an attraction in a fairground or something like that. You know, people will kind of like get drawn towards something, and in the same way, we're developing that, if you like, a habit of encouraging our thoughts to disengage from whatever they're occupied with and come to something a bit more interesting or a bit more useful, which is that, you know, our posture, our movement, in all its kind of various aspects. I think this is quite a nice feeling. I think it's very characteristic of Tai Chi and Qigong. And process that once we are familiar with this, then it doesn't exactly speed up. It becomes smoother and more kind of natural. And at the same time, this feeling physically of moving more from your center, more from the root. So that if you like, mental aspect of gathering in and the drawing of your weight into the ground, the rooting down, and the physical adjustment of your posture and all the benefits that come from that are really part and parcel of the same process. We begin to associate each with the other. So there are times when a deliberate decision to think about your posture and maybe sort of just let your hips drop a little bit will be enough to just give you that little bit of a kind of break in your mind. Other times it'll be more a case of drawing your attention in so that you're more aware of your posture and can work with your posture. Two sides of the same coin. When you're doing this, it's worth thinking about some of the trickier aspects of the posture. I'll come a bit closer so you can see. I should have had my tighter trousers on, but if you can see my knees, I'm trying to keep my knees fairly still. A very common problem is this. This is a bit exaggerated. I mean, I rarely see people moving this much, so it does sometimes happen. And this sideways movement with the knees is quite bad for the structure of the knees because it can strain the tendons on either side of the knee. It's also, as soon as you do that, you're weakening the structure of your whole body. So it's something to be avoided, but it's quite tricky. As I turn in one direction, there's a tendency for my leg to get pulled over. So what I have to do is I push my knee forward slightly and I rotate it outwards. So, and there's a little bit of a stretch on the inside of the leg. And then I go in the other direction and that will tend to happen. And so I do the same thing. So I'm trying to do that all the time. And I try and do it at the same time as I'm turning. So it's not this and then this, it's the two things happening together. Think about that. Another way of looking at it is to use an image like this. Sometimes say it's like you're holding a ball between your legs. Whichever way works for you, don't expect it to work immediately, and it can be a bit frustrating. When I first started thinking about this, some years ago, I was finding that I'd go outside and I'd start practicing. As soon as I started moving, I could think about nothing other than my knees. I forgot everything else. So for a few days, actually, it was very frustrating because every time I went out, it's like my knees, my knees, my knees. Then I gradually didn't forget about it, but it became less of an immediate focus. And a couple of years later, I was up in Manchester in a friend's place for a seminar, and the hall we were in had mirrors. And I was just warming up for the day. There was a few people around. I was standing there doing a few exercises, and I looked over to the mirror and I thought I'd check my knees, and it was, they were fine. They were pretty much in line. So it's one of those things that takes a little while to build up. So every now and then, just think back to what's happening with your knees. Try and keep your hips loose, turning from the center of the body. And moderate the turn. The further you turn, the more likely you are to twist your knees out of line. And then raising your arms. There are exceptions. So we've been doing Swimming Dragon. And when we do Swimming Dragon in the narrow stance, we do get that little bit of a bend in the knees. And that's one of the reasons why I always say be very careful with Swimming Dragon, because you don't want to overdo that. And then turn your hands palm down. Good, and then so just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. So the general principle is summed up in the phrase that your knees should be in line with your toes, that your knees should point in the same direction as your toes. In fact, as I said, there is a little bit of leeway, not this much, but there is some sideways movement possible for the knee, but you really don't want to do that with any great vigor. It's not like the elbow, which is a simple hinge joint. So a little bit of sideways movement can be quite good because it keeps the tendons working. But mostly where your feet point is where your knees should be pointed. So if you are practicing, you are more comfortable with your knees slightly turned out, and some of you will realize, in a wider stance, I tend to have my feet turned out. Just be aware that your knees will point in that way as well. Another thing to think about as far as your knees are concerned is how far forward they come. Not so much in this exercise, actually, because you are deliberately rocking forwards and backwards. But what you may find is, as your knees get to a point here, my knees are roughly over the balls of my feet. As I go a little bit further, now my whole posture is starting to wobble around. So generally speaking, you want to try and get into the habit of having your knees above the balls of your feet. When I was first taught Tai Chi, the phrase was, again, knees in line with toes, your knees above the toes. But I think that's a little bit too far forwards for most of us. Some people saying in stances like this will actually have their weight, have their knee above their ankle. So there's some variation there. But again, it's about keeping the body in line, keeping the body open, because if the joints of your body seize up, it's a bit like, you can imagine the house where all the doors stick, or you go for a walk somewhere and there's all these gates and they're all rusted up. you just don't get the same quality of movement going through. Hands to your sides. All the joints of your body are crucial for the movement. Some joints in some systems are referred to as energy gates. Knees and hips, I think, elbows sometimes. And so again, we have this idea that like gates, we want to be able to move freely through them. Another thing to think about with all the joints is that the synovial fluid that covers the bone and essentially lubricates the joint. A bit more complicated than that. But what tends to happen is if you've been sitting for a long time, for instance, then it congeals. It goes kind of quite thick. When you start to move again, it's like if you've got some soup in a pan and you leave it overnight, it gets thicker. Then when you warm it up, it gets thinner again. So as you start to move, the synovial fluid in the joints begins to soften up, become more liquid, and the movement becomes smoother. Another very good reason to take care to warm up, to do some exercise at the beginning of the day before you do anything too strenuous, which would involve straining the joints. Now this time, letting your weight settle, hips dropping back and pushing up. So when I go back, I want to do this, not this. So when I sink back, if I get my hands out of the way, I'm going back like that. Now the problem there is it's very easy to get pulled backward because your hips are going back. What will correct that, and I'm going to exaggerate this. If I let go in the small of my back, as I come down and my hips go back, see I'm just wobbling around and I tuck the pelvis under, and I've done that too much and I've thrown myself out, but it's that kind of action. We call it sitting. And when you sit in a chair, that naturally happens. So you don't have to make that happen. You just have to ensure that you're not stopping it happening. So if you see the phrase or hear the phrase, the pelvis tucking under, it's an observation, not an instruction. Don't try and make it happen because you shouldn't need to. Your body knows what to do. And if you interfere too consciously, you'll probably get it wrong, probably overdo it. Just trying to encourage that free flow through your body, releasing the feeling of being stuck in some places, perhaps. They soften your shoulders and your arms and hands. And then change to the wild goose. So with these basic opening movements, they're very straightforward, and you've all been doing them for quite a while. So you're able to just sort of reflect on some of these aspects of posture, movement. It gives you a little bit of space to think about things like what's happening in your knees and the alignment of your body and so on. And some of it is about simply letting your body move in the way that it has really evolved to move. So by focusing your conscious thoughts on those sort of tricky bits of posture, you know, where are the knees pointing and so on and so forth, you kind of remove a potential for interfering with these natural movements. And that you give the thought something useful to do. And then parting the clouds. So you let this more intuitive element of the movement begin to come through. And I think that's something that gradually gets quite strong in Tai Chi and Qigong. It's all very well to say these are natural movements, but they don't always feel natural to begin with. Likewise, things like, you know, the flow of the movement, the flow of the energy. We want to interfere as little as possible. I'm not saying we would never do that. I've used all sorts of examples in the past where we might do that. We want to be very careful about any kind of deliberate, conscious, I wouldn't say interference, but engagement with these things. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky. It's one of the reasons I like the term cultivation. I like the idea that we're allowing these things to happen. We're creating the environment where these various things can develop, rather than actively growing the plant, as it were. As well as the physical details of the posture, you can be aware of feelings like that sense of space within your body, where you can feel it, where it's not present. And that's where you might just want to consciously engage. You might want to imagine breathing into that area, breathing out the tension. Imagine the movement like a river flowing over a rock, with various ideas and images that I've used. You might even want to think, well, am I doing this correctly? Is there an adjustment I need to make? So for instance, if you're doing this and you're finding it is a bit tight in the shoulder and your upper back, one thing you might want to notice is whether you're maybe doing something like this. Are you leaning backwards? This is quite common. That's where you want to be. And that's the kind of deliberate adjustment that is quite reasonable to make, I think. One more on each side. And then change to moving in 4 directions. Here, one physical check you can make is that you are genuinely turning your hips and your waist. You're not pulling your hands back, but you are just pushing them out. And again, that gives us two developments. One is that we're once again refocusing our attention, drawing our attention in, getting the benefit of that quieter quality in the mind. The other is, of course, that we are making a a genuine change to the way that we're moving. Do one more round. And then circling palms, first of all, without the turn. Then that nice sense of a drawing out from the side of your foot right up through the side of your leg. Also to the front of your arm. Not tight, and it's not sort of fully extended. And then if it's comfortable, add into that with the turning. Good, and then switch sides. Notice any difference between one side and another. There's no reason to expect that our two sides are going to be exactly the same. There can be all sorts of reasons, both short-term and long-term, for that. You maybe we just slept on one side a bit too long last night or whatever. And there's generally a difference for most of us. So then if it's comfortable, add in the turn. And then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. So remember, even when you push up and extend out, none of the joints of the body are fully extended. You wouldn't want to have a gait where people just push it right back on its hinges every single time. It soon damage the hinge, the gait itself. One more time. And then just come back to standing and staying with just thinking about the joints of the body a little bit. One image, and you sometimes see little diagrams in books with this, it's quite funny, but one image is that each joint is seen as being rounded. So in your ankles, you've got a little ball just sitting in front of the ankle. In the back of the knee, in your hip, underneath the arm, which is why arms are slightly out. There's a ball there, not like this, not straining. It's just a kind of opening up in the shoulder joint, in the elbows, in the palms of your hands and your fingers. So there's just a little bit of space in all of the joints. I mean, we could use the term energy gates to cover all of the joints really, because they're vital kind of junctions in the body. Oh, and a little ball tucked underneath the chin as well. Your jaw loose. Don't hold try not to hold an expression in your face and your jaw tight. That's very, very common. Just let your jaw drop a little bit. It's surprisingly difficult. And then just shake out. So again, don't expect to keep all those qualities while you're going through the movements, especially if it's one of the trickier movements, one of the more complicated movements. But gradually, if you just take some time every now and then to think about these things, these aspects of posture and the joints or something like that, then after a while, you will actually start to do it to do it quite naturally, and your responses will get conditioned. I don't know if I've told this group this. I have an arrangement with a long-suffering saxophone teacher that if I pay him enough money, he'll listen to me for a little while and even tell me when I'm going wrong, which is not hard at all. And before I did that, I was playing clarinet with equal success, I might add. But one day he gave me what I thought was a particularly difficult piece, and I was really sort of concentrating hard on this. And at the end of it, he said, "Yeah, that was good. That's getting better." I said, "One question: why are you standing like that?" And I said, "Well, how am I standing?" And he said, "Well, you were sort of on one leg and you were sinking down like this." Now, this is a posture that in Tai Chi we call strumming the lute. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a ready fighting position, and it's we would respond to the pressure of somebody trying to hit us, not by stiffening up, but by sinking down. That puts us in the ready position. As far as my brain was concerned, I was under the pressure from trying to do the piece of music. My response was a kind of intuitive one to try and get through it. I was thinking about the music. I wasn't thinking, "Oh, I've got to do this." You just train those responses in yourself, and it starts to work in various areas of your life. I still can't play the piece. I still can't play clarinet. So. Okay, so just swaying a little bit from side to side. We're going to be moving into bear play. So here we can move out of those alignments a little bit. Although we might regard our body as a machine, it's not a rigid machine. It has some flexibility. I wouldn't want to be here in a Tai Chi movement, a movement that was based on fighting movement, because I'm really not all of that stable. But it's quite nice to be able to move out there. I can just about do that. I'm not feeling that I'm putting my body under any strain. Not only that, but if I can be reasonably comfortable here, even if not brilliantly stable, then here will be a piece of cake. Here will be well within my means. So some of the movements that we do in these sessions are very aligned and very practical, what we would want to do in our daily lives. Some of them, we do movements that we wouldn't necessarily do outside of these sessions. They're still important movements. And crucially, we're never getting to a point where we're putting the body under strain. We don't do things like they would do in yoga with headstand and shoulder stand. There's good reason for doing that in yoga, by the way. It's not I'm not saying they shouldn't be doing it, but it isn't how we do things in Tai Chi and Qigong. Hence the idea of them being like natural movements. Bring your shoulders into it, let your hands begin to follow. So it's important not to go right out here, because now I'm wobbling around, I'm tight in my back. And part of what we're trying to do is to generate that sense of feeling in the back. Just enough space for that little bit of a swagger. Bear play. Think of the image of the bear. And of course, part of the advantage of these slightly more extravagant movements is that they do help us to understand elements of movement, what's going on in our body, that are quite subtle in many of the movements. But if we can become aware of them with something like bear play, then we're more likely to be able to be aware and to work with them in the other movements. To keep doing this, but in a few moments we're going to change from this to the movement circling arms. That's this one, by the way. And I'm going to try and make that transition quite smooth. It will be a case of bringing your weight more to the middle and simply directing the arm that is going forwards and down to a more forwards movement, and the other arm to a more pulling backwards movement. So it's not a huge adjustment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around so you can, perhaps if I can get myself in the right position, you can follow my movements. Just sort of synchronize with my movements. So say go into your left, take your time, pause if you need to wait for me to catch up, into your right, into your left. And this time what we're going to do is stop in the center and turn and push the right hand forwards and draw the left hand back. So now we're keeping much more of an alignment between shoulder and hip. We're actively delivering a force, a power, an energy to a particular point in front of us. I'm going to turn around and you can mirror my movements. And we're trying to be as efficient about that, as economic about that as possible. We don't want to be out here and using some of the energy to maintain the body being upright. And yet, in terms of the movement itself, the energy, that sense of movement through our spine, through our back, is no different to bear play. So the movements like this that are more directly taken from Tai Chi Chuan itself tend to be a little bit less forgiving in their postures. Another transition of the same type might be from fisherman cast a net to pushing a wave. Do one more on each side. Just let your hands drop for a moment and just using the hips and the pelvis to tilt a little bit. Imagine the gentle curve going up through the back. You don't want it to be like this. You can see now. You want to feel that if somebody were to say, push on your head, there'd be a nice smooth transmission of the movement. If I do this, suddenly it will get caught up to around about the middle part of my back or something. Hands in front of you and just letting your wrists flex and extend so that as you feel the hips move, so what I would do is I'll move my hips, obviously that's throwing the body there, my shoulders will respond and my shoulders will take my hand with, and then it's back the other way. I actually think this is quite nice. It's not quite as strong as the full swimming dragon movement. You do get that nice sort of fluid quality in the spine, but then drop your hips down so your hands go down below your navel and then across between belly and solar plexus, across between chest and head and over the top of your head. And you can see as I do this, you can see here what my knees are doing. I'm exaggerating that a little bit so you can see. Obviously, do please be very careful as you do this. And if you're comfortable with the idea, bring your knees together. And now you get that sense of the whole body. Swimming dragon, I mean, if you think of how something like, an image like a water snake or an eel or even some fish, when you see film of them in the water, they're moving with this sense of the whole body in one unit. Or even something like an otter or something like that. So those are the kind of images that you're looking for. And go the other way. Good. So another one that's good for the joints. Again, going back to the knee, there is this potential. You can see my knee can go from side to side. That is a part of normal movement. It's also something that is quite kind of, this, for instance, is, if sometimes you might see a rugby player or something like that get their knee twisted up. It can be very bad. It's a very common injury in skiing, for instance. So we have to be careful, but we do want to work the tendons. We do want to work that movement. Otherwise, we will lose it completely. However, we're going to go into stretching between heaven and earth, and if you want to take it to a point where you're on one leg, again, I'll come a bit closer so you can see. Try not to laugh when I fall over. You see there, I've got that line down through the body. Watch what happens when I twist my knee. I'm off. As soon as that line goes, then it would be a real struggle to be upright. So the more demanding the exercise, the more we have to be aware of those alignments. But we'll start off stretching between heaven and earth, just the basic movement, the foundation movement. Turn one hand palm down, push your hands away from each other, feel the body opening and then contracting on the other side. So as always, see how you're feeling with this exercise. Don't see it as a failure if you think to yourself, well, I'm just going to hang around, stay with this stage for the moment. Pushing up a little bit from your feet, sinking down. So it's not just a movement in your upper body. And then, once again, developing it to whatever point you wish, moving your weight, and coming down more in the middle. Try not to move your arms too quickly. What generates the expansion in the upper part of your body is the push up from the legs and the expansion from the center, and it's the expansion from the center that moves your arms. So in a way, your arms can't move until something's happened in your legs. And again, you wish to take it to the step. So be careful with the step out. I generally step out slightly wider than hip width with this one. So that's why my foot is turned out. And then I can get more of a sort of drop in the middle. And then if it's comfortable. So now I'm going to drop a little bit on my leg, push the other foot out, move across. But be careful if you are doing this, when you go down on that supporting leg, don't go down too far. Make sure you put the other foot down in good time. If you train really hard, you might be able to go down all the way on one leg, but you'll have to train for a long time to do that. Again, you might find there's a difference between one leg and another. Okay, and then bring your feet parallel. Shaking. Okay, so 1 foot forwards. Transferring your weight. When we start to move our weight, whether it be in this stance or the parallel stance, of course, it really, the very act of moving is likely to compromise all of these factors that I'm trying to get to talk to you about. So for instance, when I move my weight forwards here, I'm trying to face forwards, and so there may be a tendency for this back knee to collapse inwards through the very act of moving. As soon as we introduce an idea of change, then everything becomes a bit trickier. An image I often have for this is if you're on a bus or train and you're standing. On a number of occasions, I've attended Tai Chi events in London, and there's always a group of you ends up on the underground afterwards. And of course, we've been doing Tai Chi all day, so we got on, and it's probably quite crowded on the tube. So we stand, and we're all standing there like this because we're all Tai Chi people and we can root down and so on and so forth. And then the train starts to move and everybody has to make a grab for something, because as soon as you introduce random change, it's unpredictable. How we deal with that is through this quality of sung, relax, center, sink down. The more we can do that, the more we can adapt in our environment to whatever change is taking place. And then just raising your toes and your heel. Stepping in. I think that aspect of Tai Chi is really quite useful. We live in changing times, don't we? So it's worth considering that. One of this country's great teachers, a guy called Dan Doherty. Dan learnt Tai Chi in Hong Kong, where they play it quite hard. He's done a lot of martial arts elements and is a strong proponent of the martial art of Tai Chi. More recently, he developed Parkinson's disease, and in a recent book of his, and obviously sort of like his words are quite important to people, he described Tai Chi as the martial art of change. In other words, these ideas, these principles, the idea of sung, for instance, enable us to change within a changing environment, to actually keep our center and so on and so forth. So on the other side, you can see just from a simple exercise like this that is a very tricky process. So the message, if you like, is to come back to your center, back to your root. And then raising your toes and your heel. And then stepping in. And taking a few steps forwards or backwards, depending on where there's most space. Change direction if you haven't done so already. Coming into alignment. This is a big change, isn't it? One step after another, and each time we take a moment just to align, to be aware of that alignment through the body before we try and move on. I didn't do it that time I was talking, so I wobbled a bit. Shake out. Okay, so forwards, and let's go straight into Fisherman Castanet. When we start an exercise like this, first few rounds, we're very careful about not overdoing the arms. The arms stop moving when the weight stops moving. And then we gradually become a little bit more aware of the flow through the body, the momentum that builds up. So then after a while, although the weight stops moving, there's a little bit of an overspill, shall we say. If we approach it in that way, we can avoid a very common error with an exercise like this, which is that we start off doing this. So you just feel out to the edge of the soft boundary of your movement. And then as you feel that you're approaching that, just feel the beginning of a kind of stiffening up. What happens if you can sink down a little bit more? That's sung. Sometimes you can get a little bit more space. There, I apply that quality of sung. Oh, and suddenly I've got more movement. Suddenly in that process of change, effectively by relaxing the hips, but don't make it too complicated. So quite often our normal response to, say, a change around us is to feel threatened by it. The adrenaline reaction sets in, we stiffen up, we tighten up, we're ready to fight or flight, or maybe we freeze up. Tai Chi asks us to do the opposite. Now, pushing away. Remember, there are elements in your brain that, just like when I was trying to play the clarinet, only have one response to pressure, whether it's a difficult piece of music on a difficult instrument or a saber-toothed tiger roaring round the corner, or a letter from the bank manager. It's either on or off the adrenaline reaction. And it can be quite useful at times, but not all the time. Sometimes we need to just, if you like, release that pent-up energy. Good. On the other side. So you can feel physically the effect of, for instance, just allowing some of the tightness in your hips to relax. You can play around with this. Obviously we want to do the movement right, but sometimes here my back heel's off. I'm wobbling around, but can I just, my knees are a bit overextended, but I've become more stable. Play around with it. See what happens. And if you're interested in this, quality of song and what it can give you and so on and so forth, don't take my word for it. Feel that it does actually work for you on this physical level. And then pushing away. One more time. Stop your hands together. And over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. The other side. Your back. And your hips. Your legs. Your belly. The upper part of your chest. The term Sung, S-U-N-G, as it's rendered into our language, is the one that is quite often translated as relax. And I mean, relaxing is part of it, but you know, quite frankly, if you're standing up and you just completely relax, you'll just fall over. You need some kind of strength there. The character for Sung includes a picture of a tree growing up. It also includes a hair hanging down. There's all sorts of kind of images and inferences you can draw from that. So Sung covers a range of things. Relaxation is part of it, but calming, quieting the mind, gathering your attention, rooting down, releasing, not straining against the forces acting against you, and so on and so forth. All of these things that we've been looking at, even the softening of the joints and so on and so forth, are all part of Sung. If you want an example of how we might use Sung, well, I wouldn't go jumping in the sea at this point. It's probably a bit chilly, but you know, like next time you're in water, think about how you're naturally responding. If you kind of stiffen up, then you're just going to get knocked over by the waves. Or even in a swimming pool with no waves, it's going to be really difficult if you're that kind of softening quality is an advantage to moving against the force of water, which is quite a powerful force. So this is one of the great aspirations, I suppose, in Tai Chi. Coming back to Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain, thinking about, you know, in a way you're coming in to that quality of Sung. So from here, you push up and out, and as your arms extend, quite possibly you may start to stiffen up in your shoulders, but always there's a kind of, again, a gathering back. I talked about this sort of magnetic quality, and we're always looking to come back to Sung. And as soon as we move out from it, it's the thing that we want to come back to in Tai Chi. Feel how that works for you in your body. What are the things that you would most want to happen when you're standing in the supermarket queue, or there's that little bit of pressure from outside in one form or another? How would you best find that quietness in that space? One more round. and shake out. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, cheers, Mike.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye then.
Thank you all.
Thank you again. Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
See
Thank you, Mike. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.